record. And hopefully that will fix our problems. The reason we record these, we do actually keep them and make them available to all of you. You'll actually see me point to several of our previous trainings throughout the deck and share where you can find those. We are up to almost 70 trainings that we have done, so there's quite a library there. So hopefully you will be able to take advantage of that. Outside of Fundraising Friday, through our partnership with the Resilience Initiative, we do offer one-on-one fundraising coaching. That can be anywhere from 1 to 5 hours. You can sign up for multiple troughs if you have not used all of your hours with other providers. But we are able just to, essentially be a thought partner around anything fundraising or revenue generation. We can use that time to train staff or board or volunteers on fundraising topics. We've used that time with folks to do campaign planning, to do integrated comms and fundraising planning, major gift training, you name it. Since 2020, we have likely trained on it or done a fundraising coaching session on it. So if you have any interest in that, please reach out to Michelle at resilienceinitiative.org and she can get you hooked up with our program team. And as I mentioned, we have been both at this coaching as well as hosting Fundraising Friday for some time now. We have quite a YouTube channel built. You are also able to get all the PDFs of the decks that we've done. And we've also rolled out a new tool, which I will talk to you about here in a second. That is called the Convergence. So if you go to progressivemultiplier.fund, there is a section on our website for the Convergence. This is our community of practice. What you see live is phase 1, but there is a fairly meaty and everyday growing library of downloadable tools, templates. All of our case studies are accessible through there. So if you've been a grantee and we've done a project together, we have case studies that are helpful. So if there's anything that you're looking for, before you create it yourself, take a look here or give one of us a call, and we likely have a template either published or in the works that we can shoot you for anything fundraising needed. So really excited to finally have this up and running. All right, before we dive in, I wanted to make some call outs here. So inauguration just happened on Monday. For some of you, it has been a really long, painful week for those groups that are dealing in what we call an ideologically aligned space. Some of you do not have groups that are affected as much by policy-driven shifts or administration changes. We have both kinds of groups on this call. There is a broad spectrum of information that in terms of post-election, post-inauguration, new administration, fundraising info that will be applicable to everybody. And then we'll also go over a handful of things that are more in tune for those of you who drive revenue more according to an electoral or an ideological cycle. So I put all that up front because please don't bail if there are a couple slides in a row that you're like, I don't have time for this. This doesn't apply to me. I promise you, I have tried to keep at least 75% of this applicable to everybody. So any questions before we dive in? And I would ask you to raise hand or chat because I'm largely looking without video. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a discussion about what everybody's experiencing, both post-election and post-inauguration. For some of the groups we work with, that has been a continuation of one sort of trend. For some, they've seen different things, post-election versus post-inauguration. We're going to review what do we know based on what we saw post first Trump administration inauguration in 2016 and tactics that worked. That will be more aligned for those folks who are in that electoral ideological fundraising piece. And then we're going to get into a lot of meat around what all of us need to know and need to navigate with the new administration that could affect fundraising. So things like tax policies, asset valuation, consumer confidence, executive orders that affect our world, things like that. So hopefully we will leave here with everybody having a game plan of how to attack their fundraising planning if they have not already got one in place. And please forgive me, I'm still letting people in here from the waiting room. All right, so let's jump in for a discussion. And I understand here on the East Coast, it is just past lunchtime. And on the West Coast, y'all are probably still digging into first and second cups of caffeine. But ask everybody as they are comfortable to please join in to this conversation about how your fundraising has changed post-election and post-inauguration. I am happy to share from the Progressive Multiplier perspective. We are primarily philanthropically funded. We are 6 years old and have just in the last year started down that road of diversifying our own fundraising through work through our LLC and fee-for-service within our C3 and C4 entities. But the biggest change for us has come post-election. Most of our philanthropic partners that we were expecting December renewals from actually said, let's take a beat because we're going to re-strategize. So I have about $500,000 hanging in the balance for renewal that I don't know is going to come through or not. So that's been the biggest effect for us when it comes to our own fundraising. Anybody else hearing that or experiencing any other post-election or post-inauguration trends, and whether it's their philanthropic, individual donor, fee-for-service, anything like that?
Yeah, I have two questions. Hi, everybody. My name's Mina. Should I just raise my hand through the reactions if I want to add in the future? Or just,
Yeah, that'd be
okay,
great.
cool. I just didn't want to like speak out of turn or anything.
Yeah.
But our organization, so I'm the community food director at a agriculture nonprofit down here in New Orleans. And so a lot of our funding, we have a lot of like foundation grants and individual donors, but we also, of course, have a lot of like grants to the USDA because of agriculture. And so we've definitely experienced some shifts in the last few days. And some kind of funding in the air. So it's a little, it's definitely doesn't feel secure. It feels a little murky. But
Yep.
yeah.
What kind of fumbling are you dealing with when it comes to your government funding? That's definitely a topic we're going to touch on later. But would just love to hear if there's what you're dealing with the executive orders and things like that.
So far, there's no funding that's been like revoked. We're just getting kind of like odd emails from certain groups of like, oh, that meeting's been canceled out of our control. Just things like that where it's like, why now is it out? And also to have them like say it's out of our control. Just a lot
Yep.
of just uncertainty. We're hopeful, but it's definitely uncertain.
I hear you. We are definitely hearing that from all the groups that we work with that have any sort of government contracts or fee for service work going on. Who else would like to share how their own fundraising has been affected, election or inauguration or both? Let's see, someone just raised their hand. Now, if only I could see who it was.
Oh, sorry, that was me, Bethany.
Go ahead. Go for it.
I mean, some immediate things. I mean, literally this morning, a California funder I've been cultivating for the last year who was looking promising has said, oh, well, now we need to put all this money. Our budget's been slashed to reallocate it towards the wildfires and the election response. So, that's just one data point, but I think I expect to hear more of that type of thing, kind of similar to what you did. In some ways, though, the external funding, we also are primarily foundation funded. The external environment throughout 2024, even before the election, was so tumultuous. It seemed like literally every one of our major funders either had a new leader or was doing strategic planning. And I mean, to the point of like $3 million worth of our 10 million in revenue up in the air. And so I think it just sort of makes that even more unstable now because people, they're factoring in new factors. And then lastly, government funding. Yeah, we worked really hard with the U.S. Forest Service to get as much money tied up before the 20th as we could, and we did. We got our, so that was accomplished, which felt great. They've been a great partner.
Awesome.
And right now I'm looking at something from NIFWIF, I'm looking at something from the state of California, and I'm like, well, should we, shouldn't we? Like, who knows where so it's really hard to know, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the hard to know is the hardest part for the groups that we've been talking to, is that sort of the re-strategizing, where's money going? I think the other thing that has happened to us, several of our longtime program officers have sort of vanished with no notice, and that they are no longer with the organization. So I don't know if there are staffing shifts happening more broadly within funding partners, because that always destabilizes a relationship a little bit. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are some shakeups on that side as well. Anyone else? Anyone seeing like bumps in giving? No immigration groups on the phone or anything like that.
Hey.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Christine.
Hey,
I work for
Christine.
INRO, which is an INGO registered in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
We work in abortion justice. So we are one of those organizations where we are very super alert what the global gag, how it's going to impact us. We're having donors changing their strategy. We're having people moving money directly to Global South and not through maybe NGOs registered in the US. We're having some of the donors who are in the pipeline tell us, kindly hold on, we're still negotiating with our board. So we are already seeing the impacts in in a big way, an impact in how the future for the organization can be, especially with people, with donors who are with family foundations.
Mm-hmm.
But then currently we don't have any government funding, which has been
Okay.
affected. So that's something.
Got it. Okay, I really appreciate you sharing, Christine. And y'all, I definitely apologize. My video is really funky in that I can usually see like one of you or myself. So Debbie, go ahead. See you raising your hand. Could you come off mute?
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm with Visión y Compromiso. We're a statewide organization of promotoras. We're an immigrant serving organization. I'm definitely hearing re-strategizing. I'm hearing wait and see. I am hearing, oh, we were already low in revenues, and now we're being stretched with wildfire and immigration response, but also looking at rapid response network. Yeah, just curious to hear what other folks are seeing too. And then there's some uncertainty about federal funding and whether that's actually going to be there, even though RFPs are open now, as well as the safety and security issues related to federal funding. And
Yep.
So, yeah.
Debbie, any spike in your individual giving in response to what's happened post inauguration?
We actually don't have a lot of individual giving.
Okay.
Something that we're exploring right now.
Got it. Okay. Sounds good. Anybody else want to share before we move on? All right. So I want to take a quick look back at 2016 briefly, just in case there is anything that we can glean to say, here's what we can expect. So the election cycles typically, for as profound as they are emotionally and policy-wise, There isn't a ton of like long-term effect on philanthropic trends, right? Political donors post-election, they stay pretty stable. Same with non-political donors. With the losing party, we do usually see a quick bump to those ideologically aligned with the losing party. The only time that we see a variation from this, and this is sort of, you know, something that was very 2016 oriented, was rage giving. I'm sure this is a term you've all heard. And it was sort of the big question mark for all of us in fundraising of, would this happen? Because we saw it happen in 2016. We have seen it happen since the Trump administration in response to a lot of the SCOTUS work, especially after the Dobbs decision, where we've got crisis giving happening in droves. So the one thing that I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we're not seeing it in this nearly the same way that we did in 2016, but I do want to call out that you do need to have a plan for when these news moments happen that you can take advantage of. So this is a completely shameless plug on visiting our last Fundraising Friday video. We went through very solidly how to build that rapid response fundraising plan. That is something you should have regardless, because it is, whether it is a election-driven crisis or wildfires in California, hurricanes in Florida, you know, the death of a high-profile member of your ecosystem, whatever it may be, all of those things require the same kind of tactics. If you aren't familiar, Adela de la Torre did a phenomenal white paper with several folks in the industry called Lightning in a Bottle, where she detailed, she was with the National Immigration Law Center, and what happened to NILC's fundraising immediately post Trump executive order on the Muslim ban and some of the other immigration related policies. I bring this up because we are likely to see very similar this week and in the coming weeks. You're already seeing photos on the White House social media of deportation flights. So any of you who are in this world where you are electorally effective, really important to make sure that you are ready to capture that lightning moment. Rigor is really the thing you have to have ready, and then you wait for the lightning, and the rigor is never bad. So what we always teach at Progressive Multiplier is making sure that you build the bottle so you're always ready. So there are 5 elements. These are all fairly basic things. Team readiness, defining your audience, your offer, your story, and making sure your tech is ready. Those are the 5 sort of bread and butter basic elements that you have to have ready to respond as these things come up during these, especially these first 100 days of the administration. Again, please take a look back at the immediate post-election so that you can dig into these. I'm going over this piece quickly so I can get more into the kind of universally applicable things that we need to be looking at here in 2025. But all of these, I love the slide in terms of if you can't answer affirmatively or in a really descriptive way to any of these questions, it's a really great indicator that you have work to do on making sure your bottle is shatterproof. So a board that is a fundraising board, or a board that is fundraising supportive, if they are not a fundraising board themselves, making sure your entire organization, not just your fundraising team, gets that fundraising is a team sport, knowing who's on your file, who your current audience is, and who should be there that you don't have yet, making sure you know what you can offer them that aligns to why they're on your file. Is it direct service? Is it an advocacy opportunity? Is it content and education? Whatever it may be. Making sure that you've got the comms ecosystem as well as the tech so that you can build those relationships on. So I wanted to share a quick case study of what this can mean in sort of a small way for our revenue generation, we worked with Abortion Care Network. We talked about the Dobbs campaign being one of those lightning in a bottle moments for the Dobbs decision. So when we worked with them in launching a donor acquisition campaign when the Supreme Court oral arguments happened. And then we also ran a second campaign when the decision was leaked. So you can see they spent more when the leak happened, the click-through rate was higher, and their cost per click was way lower. So what that meant for their revenue was that they were able to take their monthly donor revenue from about $3,000 a month to $53,000 a month. And about $10,000 of that $53,000 comes directly from this $30,000 and change dollars spent. So because they actually built their model when it came to aligning around that original oral arguments campaign, when the lightning hit, they were ready to go. When the SCOTUS leak happened, they were to market within 11 hours of the leak, and this is what happens. So there is a tremendous power in being ready to actually pivot to these moments in real time. So any questions about why we want to make sure the bottle is, as we say, shatterproof? Know that this is.
So can you talk a little bit more specifically, maybe
Yeah.
this other recording that I need to go back and watch?
Sure.
Building that bottle, like, is it having the language, the marketing, the way to take, accept those donations,
Yep, absolutely. And we could teach a year-long class on this. This is sort of fundraising on one slide when it comes to individual donor fundraising, regardless of at what level. So we want to take those moments when things aren't, this is what you want to do pre-election, this is what you want to do pre-big, for our groups that are in any sort of natural disaster area, this is what we work on to make sure that when those things happen, they are ready to pivot. But it is really around audience, offer, storytelling, and tech. Those are the four main tenets. And then of course the organizational culture and team alignment around fundraising. So take a look at, we've got both we have an entire training on lightning in a bottle, and we also have the electoral one. I'm happy to send those out as part of the email post training. Let me take a note of that, since I don't have anybody else from Progressive Multiplier on this call right now. And we'll include that in the thank you email links. Does that work? And then you can give us a holler if you've got questions.
that's awesome.
Okay. And Robert, in terms of what they spent the money on, their Progressive Multiplier grant went straight to the ad buy. So we did two $20,000 grants to them, or 25. So that's what it went to the creative development and then the ad spend to get then this. They had about $10,000 in monthly donations come in. And what they've been working on since is really retaining them. Does that answer your question, Robert? Sure. Okay. So most of you on this call have a busted bottle in some regard, if I don't miss my guess. I can certainly say that for Progressive Multiplier. We are currently really working on our offer and our audience, expanding beyond philanthropy. So would love to talk a little bit about where do you feel most ill-aligned to have those elements that you need to be able to pivot. If you have a fundraising opportunity tomorrow, what is keeping you from grabbing it? Is it culture in your organization? Is it the tech you're using? Is it not understanding who your potential audience is? What are the biggest hurdles you're facing in being able to have that agility? And again, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like. Doing my best to monitor the little hand pieces here. Nobody? Okay.
I
Got
can
it.
share.
Go ahead, Lydia.
I'm eating while listening, so I was going to just do chat. But, we're new Salesforce users, or at least we've had it for a bit, but we're trying to make the most of it. So our biggest issues are data and then segmentation of our audience. So still learning all the integrations that are available.
Yep.
And really trying to make sense of our data and input it thoroughly. So that's one of our biggest challenges right now is we don't have a lot of data. We don't have a lot of reporting about our funders, and I'm brand new, so I'm learning as well. But that's our biggest blocker right now.
Okay. So to attack that, especially if you're in any sort of space where you're going to end up with a quick opportunity, segmenting your audience usually increases response rates by 70% in digital fundraising. So it is one of the most important things you can do. So if you're talking about folks, if you have a digital fundraising program, getting to that piece is, it's a lift, but it is definitely something that pays off quickly. And the one thing I would say is that don't overcomplicate it, because we've dealt with a lot of groups in the past where, they want 20 different segments and things like that. Even if you can do something simple, like people who haven't donated yet, people who have given in the past year, like they donated in 2023, but not in 2024. So based on the data you've got available, focus on the what you have, not the what you don't have. So good basic start is prospective donors who haven't given yet, lapsed donors who gave before but haven't given in the last 12 months, and then current donors. Start there. And then let your data get you more sophisticated. Sometimes it's worth then collecting the data to see, okay, we want to talk to these folks about this particular campaign, but not this, or we want to talk to our monthly donors differently because they're interested in us for a different reason. So keep it simple. And this is a great thing that fundraising coaching is, if you want to sit down with somebody and we can help you come up with a schema, certainly happy to do that. I see a hand up, but it just tells me one hand. It doesn't tell me a name. So if you have your hand up, feel free.
Hi, Maura here from Soulforce.
Hey, Maura.
A question related to what you just said. So we usually try to time out throughout the year, like calendar, the donor touches that we're going to do to those specific segments.
Yep.
But what I'm not too sure about is we just kind of send them messages of like,
hey, the other night,
go ahead, Maura.
So those donor touches that we do tend to be more of donor stewardship, but we don't really solicit. So are you saying that those donor touches that we do should be accompanied with a solicitation?
100%. Not all of them, but definitely a good portion of them. So there are a lot of, the one place that I would recommend looking is the M&R Strategic Services Benchmark Study. They have a great chart in there, and I'll put that in my notes of what to send you guys after, of what the most common mixes of messaging are between straight up content, asks, advocacy messages, things like that. So if you aren't asking your donors or giving them opportunities to give additional gifts or upgrade their gifts, you're definitely losing out on revenue. Does that help, Maura?
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure. All right. So the one thing I will say is that about fixing your bottle, it is really hard to do that from fundraising because usually the tech lives in another department or the audience lives in comms, or you're looking for a better fundraising supportive culture from your executive office. you can really use those lightning moments to educate and accelerate what is broken around this kind of coordination that will help your fundraising in evergreen ways. So like share that Abortion Care Network case study. We've got several of them on our website, and say like, hey, can we take this time and get these 5 elements really aligned so that we can take advantage? Because one of the totally subversive reasons I am a fundraiser is because it is, I think, the best thing to align the entire organization around what you're there for from a mission perspective. So let us know how we can help you do that. I'm going to make a shameless plug here. This is exactly the kind of thing we work on in one-on-one fundraising coaching. So how to segment your audiences, what should your cadence look like this many asks versus this many donor stewardship touches, what should those asks be of your donor? So please reach out to Michelle if you have a desire to work on any of those kinds of things. We're happy to dig into that with you one-on-one. Okay, so other quick lessons learned from 2016, especially for the ideologically aligned, is that we are expecting rage giving to come in waves based on things like executive orders. The one thing that we are noticing, and we're hearing this from federal government employees, is that this administration has come very, very ready to move quickly. So expect this first 100 days to be very packed with these spike moments of media interest. No surprise, we know that the immigration and DEI executive orders were at the head of the pack, but we know that over the first 100 days, there will be a good trickle. So when I say build your MVP bottle, MVP stands for minimum viable product. So in a very basic, if you've had folks who have given to immigration issues before, make sure you've got them separated out in the list. Or if you are in a space where you do DEI programming, make sure that you are ready with an ask. So again, just like we were talking about with the segmentation, it does not have to be pretty. It does not have to be perfect. The timing is the most important thing. Secondly, if you are in a space where you are electoral cycle affected, it's 2025. So we know this is what we call a bust year. You know, we boom during presidential election years, mini booms during midterm elections, and then we bust the other two, which means the fundraising really, really dips. So folks who came into you in 2024, make sure you are laser focused on converting those people to sticky donors, to be your deep base. Do not think that they are going to require a lot of communication this year to stay in the fold with you. So do not treat them like, okay, election's over, we're done talking to them. That's probably your biggest opportunity if you saw a presidential year spike in the number of people who came to you as donors or of interest, is to make sure you are laser focused on stewardship for them. And then diversifying the fundraising revenue streams, because we know we are seeing diminished grassroots energy. I think I saw a stat from MSNBC that viewership was down like 53% post-election. So we know that this is not 2016, where the shock is high, the engagement is high. This is more, we knew what to expect, and it's exactly what we expected. So there isn't necessarily that catalyst that is driving revenue generation. So make sure you're looking at what your diversifications are away from grassroots fundraising, or I shouldn't say away, but to add to grassroots fundraising, which we expect to go down for a lot of groups. Passive income is, of course, the lowest lift here. So get to be good friends with your folks who work in finance in your organizations. So these are things like restructuring your savings accounts, things like that. That is usually not within fundraising's purview, but it is something because revenue is required of us. That is a really good collaboration point. And the other thing is fee-for-service programs based on programming you already do, like training programs. Figuring out a way to make those revenue generating is also usually a lower lift. not a little lift, but a lower lift than starting from something from scratch. Any questions on 2016 quick lessons that we can take going forward? All right, I don't see any little hands raised on my chat box, so we will move on from, oh, I lied. Mara, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know how others in the call feel, but yesterday I participated in another call similar to this, and someone who worked in development at another org was saying that during the end of year campaign, they actually saw negative numbers because and they tested it with like there's certain donors, and the messaging of it's an emergency, we are screwed, oh my God, we need to, you know, it's an emergency, you have to give, that wasn't playing well with their donors, and that they're saying that the donors are kind of bombarded with like stuff all the time, and that they're not responding well to that type of messaging of fear and emergency.
I think it's a great thing to call out, that the sky is falling messaging that resonated a lot in 2016 is falling very flat in most cases for the groups that we work with, because there isn't, as I say, that surprise value. So even though the reality may be that there is a deep need, communicating it in an emergent way, not necessarily as salient. So other options to pivot away from, you know, that, oh my gosh, it's an emergency, we need your money now. And that will still work for those of you who play in direct mail. That we definitely have seen that with some of the more traditional organizations still playing. But to pivot away from the emergency messaging, you could do very deep storytelling where you're actually going to a level of transparency and depth that you haven't before to demonstrate the need in a different way. I've got one of our grantees is testing sort of some deep profiles in video to show what exactly it means. In this case, it's a youth serving organization to not have these resources. So more show, not tell, as a philosophy of storytelling for right now. This is also a great time to really lean into data-driven arguments. Again, in the same vein of show, not tell, but less emotional. So great time to test different tactics like that. Has anybody played with that in terms of that has seen a emergency messaging falling flat and looked towards something else? Apologies, I just kicked my computer. Mara, is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, so if we don't have a Trump bump, which to this last question of like, you know, the shock value isn't there, or if you aren't an organization that this kind of ideological alignment never spikes your giving, what do you need to care about in this new administration? So this is the applies to everybody stuff, and this is not repeat from fundraising we've done before. So this is, you know, everything else was a little bit review for those of us who have been with us since the beginning. It's very fun to look at the participant list and see so many familiar names. So the Trump administration is going to affect your revenue. And it should affect your fundraising plans. And I don't say that with any sort of pride or prejudice around political philosophy, but there are things that are going to change that absolutely will have a direct effect on us as fundraisers. So the 4 things that I'm going to ask you to focus on building awareness around are tax policy, asset appreciation with a big asterisk around cryptocurrency, consumer and personal finance confidence, and then government priorities. So we're going to go through each one of these. I'm going to point you towards some of the assets that we have from a training and tools perspective that will help. And then we can talk about you know, what's new that you need to do based on these 4 things. All right, so trivia time. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 was one of the major pieces of legislation that rocked the nonprofit world at the beginning of the first Trump administration. Anybody who's been fundraising long enough, I'm now really showing my gray here. Anybody tell me why this rocked the nonprofit world? I know we've got some fellow gray-haired folks on this call.
Robert's in the chat suggesting getting rid of individual deductions.
You got it, Robert. So this piece of legislation essentially wiped out a lot of mid-level giving because it doubled the standard deduction, meaning that the number of taxpayers itemizing deductions went way down. And so there was no tax advantage for middle income Americans to actually do this kind of giving. They just took the standard deduction and went on their way. So, so great for many of us personally, not so great for our nonprofits. I will never forget when I was a consultant at the time, when this came through and was monitoring end of year giving for the American Heart Association. And if you've ever worked with an organization of that size, they move, you know, in the last week of the year during high end of year giving season, almost $1 million online a day. And I literally thought something was wrong with the donation form because there was this entire swath of donors missing that I would have expected from any of my forecasting models. So I was like, is this like option on the donation form just not there, et cetera, et cetera. And I was freaking out because I thought the tech was broken. And it was like, nope, there was just literally no incentive for mid-level giving. So for them, that was, they did fine year over year, except for it's like mid-level giving evaporated. So as I say, good for us personally in many ways, not so good for our giving program. It also doubled the exclusion amount of the estate tax, which means for those who are on the, have the means, they can transfer more wealth to their heirs free of estate and gift tax, which means when you're talking about estate planning, there is a lot more money available to then move to charity for that is not going to be subject to any of those sorts of regulations, which is a win. The reason I'm bringing up a piece of 2017 legislation is that it is up for extension in 2025 or could be made permanent. So it is going to be on the table and potentially changed. So this is something that is going to affect our universe, regardless of what side of the political aisle we fall on. So what this means for your fundraising plan is that if you haven't already, you are likely to see a continuation of sort of primary individual donor groups. If you have an individual donor program where you've got small dollar, not my favorite term, and major donors. That mid-level giver, there is nothing that is going to bring that mid-level giver back from this legislation's perspective. So having your bottle solid is really, that we talked about earlier, is really about small dollar. When we talk about major donors, so we're talking about people who have the capacity to give higher net worth giving that are above that concern of standard deduction. These are folks who are itemizing. You're really looking for tax efficient gift channels, stock gifts, staffs, planned gifts. And please remember that planned giving, estate planning is one part of planned giving, but planned giving is a much broader discipline. We often ignore that. So we'll get into that a little bit deeper later, but continue to make sure that you are ready for that bifurcation of your donor pool. The other thing that we are anticipating connected to this renewal of legislation or as separate is that corporations that make products within the US are likely to see a significant deduction in their income tax. So if the planned tariffs of 10% tariffs on imported goods or anything like that goes through, and they will incentivize via tax deduction making goods within the US, there is likely going to be more capacity for corporate giving. We are not thinking for 1 minute that more profits is going to mean all of a sudden philanthropic behavior by corporations. However, most corporations have attached foundations or charities, and they use those foundations and charities for essentially tax shelter purposes. So you want to make sure that you are aware of that you have a corporate giving approach if that is appropriate for you. So for us, you know, we have no problem with corporate money as long as the corporation is values aligned. So decide on what is good money when it comes to corporations for you and what those potential partnerships could look like. And make sure, especially if you are a hyper local organization, any of the big companies that you would potentially approach for donations, what their attached charity or foundation is. So for example, I used to have PetSmart Charities as a client, which is the charity arm of PetSmart, and what they use to do so their sort of tax efficient giving of their profits. Any questions on what this means for your fundraising plan? Not seeing any hands, I don't think. Okay. So another really shameless plug. We have at least 3 different levels of training on this major and planned giving. So make sure you check those out on the YouTube channel. We do one that is very specific to non-estate planned giving. So giving as part of your wealth management approaches. So that's what we're talking about here. If you do not have anyone on staff who is versed in this stuff, it is time to get versed, and we can help you with that with these free tools. The other thing I want to call out, within our convergence, we actually have a downloadable corporate sponsor pitch deck and an entire toolkit on corporate sponsorship and developing your policy for going after corporate money. RelSci or Wealth Engine, Lydia. I have used Wealth Engine in the past, and that is typically the choice of most of our grantee partners who have gone down the road of wealth screening. What's your question?
Well, trying to build a network of people using similar tools. So Bethany, can I reach out to you privately and
Absolutely.
see how you leverage it? But honestly, it's all new to me. And I think the big question, circling back to my previous issue of data, is how to leverage it. Is the information accurate? All those types of things. So getting a pulse for how others are using it and what works and doesn't.
Sure thing. And I will just, you're welcome to reach out. And I'd also say, for any of you that have any lists of a decent size, it is worth doing wealth screening as part of sort of your, whether it's annual or every 2 or 3 years budget, so that you know what the giving capacity is of the folks on file. Definitely use it with a grain of salt, because even people without capacity make planned gifts, make estate gifts. But it definitely, if you are flying very blind in terms of why folks are giving to you, then it is a worthwhile investment. A decent size for a donor list. That is a great question, Robert. So I would say if your list is 10,000 names or over, would probably be where I haven't priced Wealth Engine in a minute. But given what they were charging the last time I engaged their services, that was where it made sort of sense, based on if we could identify even 5% of the file with capacity and convert, a certain percentage of that. So thank you for teeing up that question for me, Robert, because it's I will definitely have Valeria put up what are the latest prices and what we would say what the thresholds are for investment, but that's really what you're looking for. If you have a tiny list, don't bother. Yep. Okay. And one of the big surprises with doing that kind of wealth screening If anybody has big alumni programs, this was the one that was a real surprise. We had a grantee who used Wealth Engine, did the wealth screening, and they left out their alumni because they made assumptions about their economic profile. And the folks that they targeted who fit the Wealth Engine profile for having financial capacity didn't convert well to become major donors. Their alumni, even though they were lower capacity because they were invested in the program, did convert at a much higher rate. So I always say, yes, use data, but also don't make assumptions about folks, like a large swath of folks who are on your file and you think that they don't have capacity. All right. Moving on to asset value. So the second thing on that list of 4 was making sure you were in tune with asset value and especially cryptocurrency. So we expect non-cash assets to typically do really well under Republican administrations because of deregulation. We saw this in the first Trump administration. So things like stocks, real estate, etc., all increased in value. The reason this is important for us as fundraisers is because those assets become part of wealth management giving. So stocks as they relate to planned giving or anything like that. DAF giving especially, this is where all of the DAF pieces really fall in. So, and the executive order given yesterday is definitely already sent very positive shockwaves around the value of cryptocurrency. So, and there is within that executive order, basically what does, regulation and starting to treat cryptocurrency like gold standard cash, what does that look like? So crypto could become a very valued asset, and similarly to stocks in the eyes of investment vehicles. So definitely keep your eyes on that. If you have to get proficient in what these tax efficient channels are, stock gifts, DAFs, planned gifts. They are not hard to learn. For me as a fundraiser, I was always like, somebody else does that on the team. I'm an individual donor person. I don't do major gifts. I don't do any of those things. But because of that bifurcation of small dollars and more higher net worth donors when it comes to individual giving, somebody on the team has got to have that. And I would say all of us have to be at least minimally competent in those disciplines. They're not hard to learn. You just need to know the basics. And the other reason is that making sure that the information you're sending out to your donors who have the potential to give those kinds of gifts is accurate, within legal bounds, represents the story well, and all of those things. So a couple of, we have an entire training on cryptocurrency, and we have a risk assessment around cryptocurrency. We will update that as the new legislation comes online. So definitely take a look for those. And what do you all use to accept crypto donations? There are lots of options. The big differences in accepting crypto donations are if you have your own wallet or if you liquidate it and then use somebody to liquidate it and then give it to you. So those are sort of that's the dividing line about accepting crypto donations. And in that training, there are, as I say, we did that one 2 years ago. So there are a proliferation of platforms. So that one is due to be updated. But we didn't want to do that because we knew this was coming. So we are waiting so that we don't create something that is out of date in like a minute. We've done that before. But again, if you have specific questions around crypto, happy to use those fundraising coaching hours. Or if that's a desire for the trainings, we are going to be doing one fundraising Friday every month. I think we only have the first 2 or 3 plotted out. So if there are things y'all want to dig in deeper, like do we want to do a more like late spring, early summer training on crypto or planned giving as it comes to high net worth individuals, happy to do that. Just shoot me an email. Okay. The third piece is that consumer confidence and how we're feeling as our financial health and well-being as individuals is the other big piece that affects within an administration, how it affects nonprofits and their giving policies. So we always see a post-election spike in consumer confidence. One of the interesting things here is that we saw a huge spike immediately post-election that has dipped into neutral territory very quickly, which was a bit of a surprise, I think, in all of the research that I did, both for economists and folks who are tracking what their profit margins are for Q1. So we're seeing really decent growth from an economic perspective. The jobs market has cooled, but it is certainly not a weak jobs market. But the elevated inflation is the real kicker. And it's why you've got these sort of almost contrary economic trends happening. That's taking what should be a time of high consumer confidence, because you've got a Republican administration aimed at deregulation. And usually that correlates with a high consumer confidence, then, but we're not seeing that in the same way, largely because of inflation. So we're really in limbo right now, which this is why. So Rashida Tlaib yesterday on the House floor put this out of, eggs in her district are over $9. That's really what's killing consumer confidence is the inflation on everyday goods. So while we're in limbo, there are two things I would highly recommend to make sure that your individual giving doesn't suffer from anything it doesn't need to. So prevent your donor churn, because when consumer confidence drops, you tend to lose sustaining donors. I had mentioned Abortion Care Network earlier in the call. They took a huge hit to their sustaining donor program during the pandemic, when we were having economic concerns and high inflation, and then they lost their sustaining donors in droves. So that's usually the first thing to go when you lose consumer confidence, is your monthly donors. When people start cutting back, that's the first line that a lot of people will cut, is their regular charitable donations. So make sure you shore those up. Two ways to do that: really good donor stewardship, making sure that you are saying, here's what your money's doing, here's how much we appreciate you, what can we do to make your donor experience better. So all the things that we as fundraisers know to do when it comes to donor stewardship. And make sure that you have a program in place to catch any expiring credit cards or any problems with your EFT exchanges. This can make a huge difference. Most of the donation platforms offer this as a service. So they do a credit card updater. So make sure that you have checked that out and baked that into your budget, because it's one of those low lift things that you can do during a time like this. Hey Liz, thanks for joining. The other thing that you can do is make sure that you have what we call a frictionless experience. So if new people are going to come in during this time of limbo and sort of wonky consumer confidence, don't lose them to something that is totally controllable. So make sure your donation form is optimized and it's rendering completely on all devices. Make sure that it's designed to best practice. That there are a ton of templates out there that you can use now. So it is much cheaper to design a decent donation form. Do the basics like refresh your welcome series so a new donor feels welcomed, or somebody who signs up on your website feels welcome. So all of those be a good human lessons that we learn as fundraisers. This is when you having those on lock when you hit a time of consumer confidence limbo. Those can really help you keep from bleeding money that you should have. And Marissa, thank you for joining us. All right. So one last plug for going back and looking at the trainings. We do have an entire donor stewardship program deep dive So that says like, here are all of the elements, here's how you create your standard operating procedure for donor stewardship. I think it's one of our most downloaded trainings. So if you don't have a good donor stewardship plan, this is a great place to start. And you can see my my COVID hair in that particular video when I couldn't get a haircut and my hair was down to here. So it was kind of funny pulling all of these screenshots and going back and seeing my hairstyles over the years. The last piece that I want to talk about today are the government priorities that are going to, that are definitely going to change our world as fundraisers. And thank you, Sean, for joining us. I know a lot of people have to jump after 60 minutes. So we will send everybody the recording, of course. The government priorities, typically we're just looking at what are the state and federal grant availability going to be. Right now, we've got a little bit different of a situation than we typically do because of the sort of slate of executive orders that are coming out and the sort of depth and speed at which they're coming out. So on the basic stuff, and yes, Christine, I'm happy to do that. As soon as I can take down my slides, I will put that link in. So typically when we have a new administration, they will pivot their budget to their priorities, right? Just that is well within their well within their rights. So typically at a time like this, we would be saying like, okay, we know that environmental justice groups get very little state and federal grant opportunity with a Republican administration. That is not typically their bailiwick. However, veteran service groups, the opportunities for them usually explode under a Republican administration. So make sure that you are always on top of what the administration priorities are. And again, don't assume, right? I live in Florida. Ron DeSantis is my governor. We have a ridiculous number of environmental grants available, not EJ grants, but conservation grants available, especially if it is going to shore up mangroves and things like that that help with hurricane damage. So just to always make sure that you like trust but verify kind of thing. And if you have any of these kind of grants in your budget and you think you're going to lose them, make sure that you've got a 5-year plan, not an immediate plan for how are you going to replace that money in your revenue portfolio. Don't be overly optimistic. I think especially because we've got hiring freezes with this administration already, that, you know, there's not going to be a lot of loose money quick for most of the work that we see within the kind of organizations that you represent. Capacity building grants to further progressive work, we also don't expect to be available. There was a good number of those kind of grants available within the Biden administration. We obviously do not expect that now. So think about do an analysis of the needs that your internal infrastructure needs that were covered by any sort of government revenue, fee for service, et cetera, that you might need to replace with an increase in individual giving, with a different kind of fee for service program, with a corporate sponsorship program. There are lots of ways to make money. So don't panic. Know which money you have to replace and know that it's not just in this budget year, but what can you do immediately to replace in this budget year, and then what are some of the slower burn tactics that you need to replace it going forward. The other sticky wicket that is I think a little bit unique to the moment is that we are seeing executive orders that affect nonprofits in some different ways. The primary one right now being the DEI executive order. So of course the big headline of, you know, the federal government is no longer going to be doing DEI programs. They're no longer going to be supporting the hiring of independent contractors for those kinds of programs. That affects several of our grantees directly because they had government contracts for training programs in that realm. So the other piece to this that hasn't gotten a lot of media play and would not affect the groups here, but I think all of us as nonprofit sort of brothers and sisters need to be aware of it, in that There is a part of the DEI executive order that encourages the head of each federal agency to identify civil compliance investigations within the private sector. And large nonprofit corporations are part of that. So we're talking the large, so, you know, Philanthropy 400 kind of organization. So not anybody on this call directly, but that kind of thing shakes up our sphere. You will also see on there foundations with assets of 500 million or more. So places like the Ford Foundation fall in that category. So keep an eye on this. We expect this to start to hit in the early summer. Because it's, you know, identification within 120 days. So that puts us in April. So just one of those, there are going to be a lot of those sort of, I don't want to say buried, but deeper parts of the executive orders that are not getting covered as much in the media that we as nonprofits need to be aware of, because they could very much affect our revenue. And that if Ford Foundation goes away, that affects, I would argue, 3/4 of the folks on this phone. Or if any of our foundations have to pause on giving, or they have to pull back on giving, or they have to stop giving to certain kinds of organizations. So it is be aware of what's going on around us for this. The other piece to the DEI program, this really has affected several of our grantees that do this as a fee-for-service program. So if you do any sort of fee-for-service program that has government money to it, I would definitely make sure that you have a backup plan if it touches into anything that comes close to the DEI topic. Any questions or discussion there? I know this is just a heavy one on so many levels, and I'm trying to keep this strictly like I'm here in a fundraising coach capacity, but also very much a human capacity. And I want to hold space for if anybody wants to dive in here.
So just to make sure I understand what you're saying, so like some of the, we're taking a pause, we're evaluating kind of language that we might be hearing could actually be a result of some of the larger foundations' concern about potential lawsuits or other kinds of investigations.
Yeah, Debbie, I would imagine, like, none of our program officers have said anything that direct, but you know, if on day 3 of the administration we're seeing this kind of language, if I were sitting at one of the large progressive foundations that was sitting there on a giant endowment, you know, that there's going to be something, whether it's on the DEI piece or the other thing we expect to rear its head is the HR 9495 around, you know, supporting acts of terrorism, which based on the language could be much more broad. So I think it's just important to understand it's, but I do think that, you know, philanthropy definitely feels very tentative right now. And I think this is playing into it for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other, you know, some of my board members are part of giant nonprofits in our sector. And, you know, they're doing a lot of that kind of planning of, you know, what happens if we are targeted by the administration for some reason. You know, that gray area for any of you who are multi-entity, you know, between C3 and C4 activity that is always been gray intentionally. That is also a fertile battleground for this kind of stuff. So I think it's really important that we stay aware. And as fundraisers, make sure that we've taken a real good look at our revenue portfolios for what could potentially be at risk to make sure we have backup plans. Any other thoughts or comments? As I say, this makes me real as a fundraiser, but especially, I mentioned to Robert at the top of the call, we're onboarding 2 new staff people, and I actually just went over our DEI program is called Ideal, and it's literally what we put our values laddering up to, and it's just, it feels very surreal and hard to think that that is a conversation I shouldn't be having with employees that are literally a Progressive Multiplier to serve largely Black and brown led organizations. So it's been a lot. Anybody else have questions or want to lean in here? Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, sorry. So, just in terms of like DEI language, we do a lot of grant writing, right? And so most of everything we write, there's always a DEI related question.
Yes.
And I imagine some of that will start to go away, but should we be rethinking how we respond to that question, or for smaller grants, do you think that it really makes, how consequential is it?
Yeah, Debbie, it's a great question. And I actually emailed our lawyer this morning because it is a question. I write all of our grants. So it's, what is your DEI policy is something that any of those big organizations with those over $500 million are now sitting on, exactly how, my tiny little organization handles DEI. So I don't know. I think it's something that I'm going to take on a case by case basis. Because council probably won't have a lot to say, but I would expect that our foundation partners are going to take care of it for us in terms of they will start drawing back on that language if I don't miss my guess.
And does language related to cultural competency, like, is that similarly viewed, or is that a replacement?
I think that's what is of concern with a lot of the executive orders is the lack of specificity on the language. So when I read those, there is it goes hard after sort of discriminatory hiring practices. But then there is also a lot of language in there that you could stretch into cultural competency. So I think it's how far it gets taken. I can say that in this moment, that's certainly not going to change how we operate. But, reaching out to council was one of my first priorities as an executive director to make sure what could I step in, because my job is to keep my team out of the muck. So I think it's just, nobody has any immediate answers right now, but I think an awareness of what's going on and how far it could be stretched, I would rather be over concerned and have it not happen. And that's what we're all hoping for. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay, I want to flag for everybody, the Council of Nonprofits is keeping a great PDF. I've got the link in the deck, so you'll have it when we send it. They are keeping a chart of the executive orders as they come out and sort of the different ramifications of what could affect most of us. So definitely take a look at that. They're marking it when they're updating it. The most important thing for us right now is adjusting our budget and doing the revenue makeup strategies for anything that is likely lost government contract or fee for service revenue. Make sure you touch base with your lawyer or your ED to touch base with your lawyer, however that works culturally, to see where DEI fits in the picture, if it is part of your revenue generation. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of grantees that do train the trainer programs or fee for service training around aspects of cultural competency, DEI, things like that. So talk to your counsel specifically and just stay on top of what's happening. As much as we all want to, or I should say, most of us will want to avoid the news right now. I have a few news junkies on my team, but that definitely do not avoid the news, because the more highway we have as fundraisers to fix the problem, the better. So that's really what I wanted to make sure everybody had today. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to open up for discussion, but also make sure that you all are aware that I want to recognize this is a really heavy time for a lot of groups we deal with, and certainly for Progressive Multiplier. So one of the things that's available to you as Resilience Initiative folks is the Mindful Together community. And this has been a fantastic community up to this point, where it is really somatic experiencing, guided meditation, journaling, just to sort of take care of your own health and well-being on the emotional and mental front. Lots of resources out there, but this one is absolutely available to you. So holler at Michelle if you'd like to sign up. But let me open up the floor for discussion. If anybody has anything that they wanna raise up. Robert, did you want to? I think I saw you coming off mute.
I just wanted to ask at the last part of what you were saying about DEI trainings. I mean, we do a lot of that, but it's not, none of it involves government funding. And I know there's the general like skittishness out there, but we're still getting inquiries and contracts. And I just wanted to clarify that only applies to government. You were just talking about if you're funded through government funding to do that, correct?
This is the part of the language that I'm gonna honestly say I don't know. Because within that executive order, it's asking agencies to identify publicly traded corporations, nonprofits, foundations, higher ed, all large in scale. So obviously not what you or I do. But to me, that is a line. If you're going to do compliance investigations into those organizations, of like civil compliance investigations. So that's where I think, obviously this will be challenged in court and everything else. But I think we have to keep an eye on it, because I don't think it's going to be as simple as we're privately held, because we have preferential tax status as C3s or C4s or PACs or whatever it might be. But especially for those of us who are C3s, I can see that as being a place where this then becomes, does this put your C3 at risk? Does it get that ugly? And I don't want to push any unnecessary panic buttons. So I'm trying to take a eyes wide open approach and get good legal counsel.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions, y'all? Or discussion to be had? I know we're almost at time. So I took note that we will send out the deck, and we will send out the M&R benchmarks so that you have those for mix of messages. The original lightning in a bottle training, and the training we did post-election, so that y'all can catch up and make sure that you have the links to all of our previous trainings, as well as the convergence. You will get a thank you email. It does have a survey in it. And if you could take 2 minutes and answer that, that really helps us figure out what topics y'all want to hear from us. And if there's anything we can do to make the format of these better, you know, incorporate more interactivity, do breakout rooms, make them longer, make them shorter. We're open to any and all of it. So if you could take that time, that really, really helps. So, and it was so great to see all of you. I haven't gotten to teach one of these in a while. So thank you for spending part of your afternoon with me. And if you have any questions, please reach out.
Bethany, can you also include a link for past trainings? There's a couple of requests on the chat for that.
Absolutely. You got it.
Thanks.
All right.
Much appreciated.
Well, thank you all for all you're doing. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Awesome session.
Take care.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.